Hi Arctic Dino, we're Matty again. I'm going to try and compress all of the feedback I did in my stupidly long video into a shorter one, so start the clock. I understand that everything in this map is alpha, but I also see that there's a lot of detailing going on. However, I do acknowledge that a lot of the detailing is kind of alpha detailing, it's very basic. So with that in mind, I won't be treating the map as if it's final, but I will be commenting on detail. So, this is the spawn area. It looks very nice. There are some problems, however, from the perspective of a player. When I arrive here, I'm not being drawn to the Deathrun path. The reasons for that are, I think, because it's kind of in shadow. It does not stick out very much, and there are no boundaries to guide me to it, to guide me along it. I'm encouraged to roam because the environment is very open. And although I know you're going to have clips in the final one, clips are only a way to stop people from getting where they shouldn't be. They are not a solution for good layout design or environment design. If a player is not supposed to go somewhere, it should be communicated to them using detail that they cannot get there. So for here, for instance, I would put a small fence here. It only needs to be a low fence. You could even put a line of boulders or something. It could be a broken fence. It doesn't have to be realistically high. The idea is just to indicate to the player that it is a barrier and that they should expect not to be able to jump over it. Another thing you could do is on this side of the waterline, you could raise the make this more steep, so it looks like the player cannot run onto it coming out of the water. That would suggest to them that it is an impassable area. The house is very nice, although I think the door could be a bit wider. It's unfortunate that players who spawn in here are kind of set back slightly. They also don't really get a very good view, so maybe this is a good opportunity to make a house that's twice as large, a more interesting house with large dimensions, because it is supposed to be a spawn area, so it should have the ability to accommodate multiple players. You don't really see the Pokemon on this side because there's a fence in the way, so what I would do is I'd push this fence back over here, making a backdrop, and then have just like a line of plants or something to indicate that there's a barrier. Moving on, the shading on the trees is a little bit splotchy. I suspect that you'll be fixing that in future, but I believe the reasons for that are because with threefold really. One is that texture shadows has not been enabled on the tree. To fix that, what you'll need to do is add this model to a custom RAD file and enable texture shadows in VRAD. You can read my static prop lighting guide on Steam, which is also linked in the Death Experiments Discord's guide channel somewhere, I think. And what that does is it causes VRAD to use the leaves themselves to cast the shadows and not the polygons that leaves are a part of. Another thing is, if you go into the prop settings and hammer, disable enable toggle, basically ignore surface normals for lighting, and that should make the shading on the lives more even, because at the moment you can see you've got some dark patches and you've got light patches mixed in. It doesn't make a lot of sense. The dark shadows on the tree are probably a result of the fact that the shadows cast by the leaves onto the tree are quite thick, and also coupled with the fact that the mesh itself is not a very high resolution. It doesn't have a lot of vertices on it, as you can see here, because it's using per vertex lighting. You've got a bit of a high contrast situation going on there, so you can't really increase the resolution of the model. So hopefully improving the shading on the trees using the techniques that I just mentioned will improve that. But if it doesn't, you can disable self-shadowing on this prop in the static prop settings and hammer, and it means that the prop won't cast shadows onto itself. It will only get shadows from other things. The shadow on the ground here is quite dark, and so enabling texture shadows on the leaves should improve it. On top of that, you can also increase the light map luxel resolution on this displacement area, which means decreasing the scale in the hammer face edit sheet down from 16 to 8 or 4, and that will give you a nice tree dappled effect. But another cause is that the light is over there, and so the shadow being cast onto this ground is being cast by this tree, and so it is rather dark and splotchy. The solutions there are either to remove this tree, which might be a good thing actually, because it's kind of in the way of the player's visibility of what's going on over there, and also the fact that you've got this hill here, which casts a lot of shadow on this area, making it look rather drab. So you could rotate the entire map so that light is coming from another area. Maybe it's cast from over there coming towards me, or maybe it's cast from here, which would go along here and then illuminate this area. Another thing is that because you've got this backdrop over here which looks interesting, but it is a bit visually noisy, and I feel like the Pokemon aren't really shown off very well. So what you could do to improve that is to have an actual background and a foreground. See, what you've got right now is you've placed these trees pretty sparsely to give a kind of randomized effect, which does work to some extent, but because you're making a stylized video game level, you need to kind of bring the interesting elements out into the foreground and then cover up the background to make it less interesting. So the ways you can do that are don't have noisy props like this one in the backdrop, because they draw attention to themselves because they're noisy looking. These trees are nicer because the leaves are not as visually noisy, so you could substitute these trees here for trees that have more even tones and shit, and then have fewer trees out in the foreground, and then have an open area where you have a lighter coloured mud material where these Pokemon are milling around. And then you could have some small shrubs, very small, just in tight clusters to attract the eye towards the Pokemon. Maybe even give the impression that Pokemon are grazing on them, something like that. You can also have more trees in the backdrop over here, so duplicate this tree or find other trees which are similar to it and place them in a line along here, a broken line, maybe up here as well. And that will help to hide this rather plain looking hill, because at the moment it kind of gives off like Half-Life 1 vibes, looking a bit primitive, and avoid situations where the tessellation of the tiling texture is very obvious. Well, it's not really tessellation, but you can see the tiling material here. So the solutions there are either to break it up a bit by introducing more background detailing to cover it up, like trees, or increase the scale and rotate it, or maybe adjust the landscape and the shading on it. I know. Anyway, how are we doing for time? Okay, we're not too bad so far. So let's go on. Okay, you've got this Pokemon here, which is framed nicely by these two trees, but it's accessible, and that indicates to me that this is an interactable element, and yet you cannot do anything with this Pokemon. You can't attack it or whatever, or use on it or get anything from it. So you're kind of, it's difficult really. Are these decorations? Because if they are decorations, they shouldn't really be out where the players can touch them. So I think what you should do is you should move these off to inaccessible areas, and if you still want to have them on here somehow, then make them interactable in some way. Maybe a player can touch them, use them in some way, and maybe it plays an animation, or it gives some kind of buff or drops something, just to indicate that in this world there are NPCs which you can interact with. Here, this is a bit narrow, so I'd probably want to make this wider. Maybe you could have 2 or a style or something. It's not too bad, but you've got so many players over here, so to restrict them all through here just seems a bit silly. Okay, this guy over here, he's quite scary looking, but I don't play Pokemon, so I don't know if he's going to attack me or not. As far as I'm aware, Pokemon never attack humans, they only attack each other. So this just looks like a big friendly bear. And yet it is actually a trap, if I recall correctly. Yeah. So you've just told us that these Pokemon here do nothing, and then immediately you're telling us that this Pokemon here is doing something. So we're kind of getting mixed signals. How are we supposed to know that this is a hazardous Pokemon, Is it just because he looks scary? It's tricky, really. Also, the leaves here, that kind of resembles what happens in Pokemon in real life, but they look a bit ugly. It's just the same kind of sprite repeated in a square. It doesn't look very nice, so you maybe want to have I don't know, a more attractive thing, maybe. Anyway, moving on. Over here, this is not a trap, and yet you've used the same kind of pattern of dark grass sprites here, so that's confusing. This area is quite bright as well, which attracts me towards it, and yet there's nothing here. And to contrast this, you have this rather dark area, and yet this is the Deathrun path. So you'll want to kind of add more backdrop detail here to hide the fact that it's background. Maybe put a fence along there. And then make this area more light. So what you could do is get rid of this tree so it doesn't cast as much shadow. And then extend this out a bit and then have a couple of trees on here. So that the it casts less shadow and doesn't cast as much shadow onto the path. I also feel like this area here is a bit difficult to walk on. So what you could do is, starting from here, is slowly make it more and more sheer. So have the side wall become more straight, so it's less of a hill and more of an embankment or drop. And what that will do is it will help to kind of strengthen this line to indicate that it is the path that players should be following. And it will also help to promote the fact that this is an incline to the player, because it will look more distinct, you know, compared with just the hill where the textures blend into everything. This is not a path. Sorry, this is not a trap, and yet I feel like it should be a trap because it's a section of ground which has been isolated using a high contrast piece of detailing. But the fact is that there's quite a distance between this trap and this trap over here, so you want to fix that by introducing more traps over here. You seem to have kind of immediately relaxed into a pattern of basic traps where player enters a square, a button is pressed, they die, and the only thing that differs is the effect. Now, I appreciate that at the start of a map, the traps should be fairly easy, but they should also be kind of mechanically interesting as well. If it's just juking and then immediate death, it's not really very interesting. I like the fact that you've got an automated element here. It's difficult to see this bird though because he blends into the background. He looks like he's in shadow for some reason. He's the same-ish colour as the house there, so I think what you'll probably want to do is either lighten the backdrop or increase the illumination on this this bird somehow. Maybe give it a bit of rim lighting. Maybe make the backdrop a bit more simple so he stands out on it a bit more. You can't really see these wind effects very easily. Again, they're kind of a muddy dark brown, so they don't really stick out. They also don't really give you an indication as about where the effect happens. Like, if you look at the ground here, where it intersects with there on the wood, it looks like the area effect is here, but it's actually here, which is quite bad. So you're going to get taken by surprise. I mean, you could argue that this should be used to indicate the trap bounds, but when you're standing on the side of it, it is difficult to gauge the depth. Another thing is that because the trigger is right up here, then it's very possible to kind of get caught by this and then get thrust against the edge and you can't move. So what you should do is maybe just not have a barrier on this side and make it more obvious where the area of effect is. Another thing you could do is you could have like a video game effect overlaid on top of the 3D world. So here, for instance, or this trap over here, rather than just have like the grass sprites to indicate the trap zone, which is very clever, you could have like you could go full video game and not have hazard stripes because that's kind of not really fit in the theme. But you could have like a semi unlit rounded corner box that goes around here in the form of an overlay or something. Almost indicating like a catchment area, you know, like you're overlaying 2D video game style elements on top of a 3D world. Now that you might think that looks a bit cheap and it doesn't really fit with the theme of the map, and you'd be right. But everything in here is kind of natural looking, and I don't know, this just looks a bit cheap. So it's something to think about anyway, and you can reuse that elsewhere as well, so you can put it down here to indicate the trap zone. It's just a thought, maybe not a very good one. So what else have I got? Oh yeah, same advice as I gave you earlier on applies to these Pokemon over here. You've got noisy props which kind of confuse the eye a bit. You don't really notice them, and it's kind of a wasted scene really. You've got these nice looking Pokemon milling around. Also, it's strange that they're kind of jumbled up. It doesn't really make a lot of sense, and they look sadly static. So what I suggest you do is have same style Pokemon in small clusters, and then have more of a gap between them. Rather than just kind of random assortments of Pokemon. Again, have a nice backdrop and some occasional foreground detailing, although I think this area might look a bit open, a bit too open, so you'll want to consider what you want to do there. The shading on here looks really patchy, really dark and dingy. It looks pretty ugly, unfortunately. You can see these trees against the backdrop, and it almost feels like a Left 4 Dead level because you've got these very finely high detailed dark looking tree silhouettes here. They don't fit the world at all. They're not stylized. So what you might want to do is replace these tree assets with with leaves that have no visible light through them, and also improve the light over here so it's less overcast. I didn't even notice these Pokemon over here. Now that I'm seeing them, I think their dynamic shadows are a bit too long and dark. I think maybe your dynamic shadows should go more or less straight down with a slight variation, because the long dynamic shadows looks a bit odd, and also they clip through geometry here as well, so that's a bit strange. This looks like a very large trap zone. This guy in front of us, I don't know what he does, but I'm guessing if I wander in there I'm just going to die again because I'm not familiar with the Pokemon. I don't know what effects they have, what powers. This could be a good indicator of the power that the Pokemon has, maybe that it can make things fall asleep. If it's just decoration, then you don't see it, so that's a shame. Excuse me. I like the fact that you've got houses on a jaunty angle here. It really makes the area more interesting. The street kind of feels a bit wide for a path here. You've got this fairly narrow path, which has been accommodating 31 players up until now, up to 31 reds, and then you've got suddenly a quite wide path which can accommodate lots of players. And the problem with having a wide path is that players can easily run around and get lost, especially when there's shit to look at. You want to try and keep players together as much as possible. It also there's no indication that there's any traps here. It just looks like a place to walk, and there's a lot of walking going on, which is a shame. It would be good if there were more traps. And again, the shading here is rather sketchy. But I do like the buildings. They're a nice touch, and the detailing looks quite nice, especially the fact that you got 45-degree angle buildings and stuff, Maybe you could have more buildings here, have more of a village effect going on. I think if you've got a house where players cannot access, then the interior should not be visible. These windows should be opaque, because this encourages me to investigate to see if there's a way to get inside it, to see if there's like a secret or something. And you want to avoid slowing players down and tearing them apart because players are going off on their own little quest, because that's a worse experience with the activator. Always try to keep people together as much as possible. This vista is quite interesting. Again, the shading though looks dark and dingy, quite black. The dark silhouettes of these seats against the backdrop look rather dull and dark. You don't even see the dock, which is a big shame. So you don't really see where you're supposed to go. Like, am I supposed to go to the left or the right? I'm kind of left to explore for myself. So some solutions here I think would be good is maybe extend this path a little bit and have it as a slope going down about 512 units, and then drop this dock down by about 128 units, maybe 192. And then this road, then when people go down the slope, the effect of dropping this area down will be that more of this area is visible as you approach it at the top of the hill, so you'll be able to see more of the docks, which is good because that's where players are going to go next, and more of the building there. And yeah, and it kind of varies the landscape a bit. Over here, oh, what I would do also, because you want to lead players into this direction, is to, rather than have like a right angle, is have a turn here, like a bend, so players naturally feel inclined to go round here. Keep this one as a 90-degree turn though, because it then looks more like a parking area. Maybe what you could do is you could put more parasols and stuff. I'd also get rid of the seats here in the middle, because they're kind of blocking line of sight and they look a bit naff. Maybe have them over to one side over here, you know, like in a couple of rows at a time or something. Maybe tables and chairs, I don't know. Nothing too fancy, because you don't want to draw attention to this area too much. You don't want people thinking that there's a secret over there. This building here kind of blocks line of sight of the bay, so I would have this over to one side, maybe over to the left, or maybe you could even have it over here. That would make more sense. Or alternatively, you could drop it down a bit. Maybe split it into two buildings. So I'm going down here, which is good. This building kind of gives me a feel like it's a medical area. It's not very detailed on the front. These doors look like something out of Medic's hospital. I guess it's some kind of tackle shop, I don't know. But I think maybe another window here, or a couple of tables and chairs, some more props, maybe another door or something. Don't have these kind of doors because they don't really fit the theme, I don't think. They look more like doors that would be inside a building. Props and shit here. Okay. Chunky steps. I'm encouraged to go up here. Is there something interesting? No, there isn't. Okay. If players are supposed to go up here, that's fine. But if they're not, maybe think about ways to discourage them from going up there. Here, it's not really very obvious what's going on. So far, I've been trained that small Pokemon are no threat to me and are non-interactable. So this guy here should do nothing. I feel at this stage that this is a dead end, and I'm really not sure what I should do. I've been taught so far that pallets are just detailing. They're not like breakable objects or anything like that. So this just looks like a solid wall that I can't get around. So my first thought is, do I go over here? No, I can't, because that's an invisible wall. Do I go over here? Well, apparently not, because there's no way to get there. So do I break these? I'm really not sure. It's not obvious, again, because I've been trained. So if I use my playtest mode, is playtest mode enabled? There we are. So I'm looking at Funk Breakable. So they are actually breakable, but I don't know how they break. I think there's a trap here. Or not. Okay, maybe it is breakable. In any case, it's not obvious. So what I think you should do is, if you want people to think that these objects are breakable, then you need to train them to know that they're breakable in some way. So what you could do is you could have maybe have pallets over here which are breakable, and then just have like a power-up or something behind them. Maybe you could have like a health thing or a metal thing, and then just put like a couple of pallets up that people can break in a few swipes to get through them. You know, something like that. Or maybe just have them in on the ground, and then people would, maybe they feel like they can take a pot shot at them, and then when they get over here, they'll think, "Ah, this is breakable." I really don't know what the purpose of this is, but it looks weirdly sexual, to be honest. All right. Oh yeah, another piece of feedback I had was that if you stand here and look down here, this scene does not look very realistic. I understand that you're trying to make an impassable wall, but you don't really need to do that. I think what instead you should do is you should have smaller piles of crates, but spread apart. So almost in like a cartoon fashion. So have like 1, 2, and then a third one on top in a small triangle. Make them look more presentable. This big solid wall here is like a big blot on the landscape. It kind of blocks your visibility and looks ugly, unrealistic. So if you broke them down into smaller piles, they look more thematic, more picturesque, more interesting. The collision, I think, on these is a bit dodgy. So if this is the V-Physics mesh, then you should make your own collision mesh out of block bullets, which more closely matches the boats. especially when you consider that when you're in third person and you see the collision mesh, it doesn't make a lot of sense. I think I had issues getting onto this. I think I missed and then fell off. I know you're wanting to change this. The line of crates here is a bit too janky looking. You want to level them off a bit. You also maybe make them 192 units apart, because when I'm jumping from something to something else, I like for there to be... I don't like having to hold stop in midair. It kind of feels inorganic and uncomfortable. So I prefer to be able to just hop basically from one thing to the other. And a distance of 192 units, I think, is doable for a heavy, so it's probably fine. Have them bobbing up and down slightly, maybe on a slight axis of rotation, which is unique to them, so maybe rotate them along the x-axis a little bit. You could animate this in Blender or something, or you could attach like a func door rotating or a func door to them to make them bob up and down. Might look a bit dodgy though. And it would probably increase definitely it would increase edicts and network traffic. This area, this is not a particularly challenging path. It's not really a trap or hazardous in any way. And because you've got so many players all channeled down this narrow area, it will thin them out more naturally, again spreading them apart, which is not something you want to do. So one thing you could have is you could have two routes, another route that goes over here. They could be separate, they could converge in the middle, and on either one you could have a manually activated trap, maybe something that disappears, or maybe you could have another Pokemon that flies across it or something, you know, increasing the number of manual traps. So I'll leave it there for the time being, because this video has already gotten quite long, and I've obviously got other stuff to say about other areas, so I'll press stop.